Fallen Star by Alydia Rackham. Read by Maria Chester. For this and other recordings like this, visit wonderfulworldofstories.wordpress.com or subscribe to my YouTube channel, Wonderful World of Stories. Chapter 3. Loki sat back in a plush, L-shaped white couch that fit into the corner of the lab. He winced as he lifted first his left foot, then his right, and propped them up on the short table in front of him. He already felt the painkiller, odd little colored beans he had swallowed with water, begin to numb his headache, but the throbbing tension in his side did not ease. He was not about to make mention of it, however. These women clearly were not medically minded, nor very well equipped. Besides, he hated being touched. Jane sat across from him on her armless desk chair, one leg tucked up underneath her, her delicate hands folded in her lap. She stared down at the small table where Loki's feet rested, her eyes distant. Darcy stood even further away, near a large computer screen, arms crossed, biting her lip and watching him. Loki's mouth tightened. "You seem disappointed." Jane started, and her dark eyes flicked up to his. Loki's jaw clenched involuntarily, for the effort of speech had sent raw pain down his side, but he betrayed nothing on his face. Jane's mouth worked for a moment. Then she gave him a nervous smile, glanced down, and tucked her hair behind her ear. "No, I was just expecting someone else when I saw that phenomenon in the desert again." "The Midgard Bridge," Loki corrected. She glanced at him and nodded, then resumed her distant stare. Loki did not relent. "You were looking for Prince Thor." Now he had both women's attention. Loki cocked his head at Jane. "You expected him to return so soon?" He shot a quick glance at Darcy before turning back to Jane. "Well, that seems unrealistic, don't you think? Even if the bridge hadn't broken, his banishment had just ended. He would want to see his family." "He was banished?" Jane's gaze sharpened. "Why?" Loki did not answer right away, gauging whether or not he should reply. But then the glass door at the far end opened, and an older man strode in, his head down, his brow furrowed. He unzipped his gray jacket and scratched his head. "Well, Jane, I'm supposed to meet Nick Fury tomorrow, in the middle of the night. He wants to debrief me so I can debrief you. And then he says he found something." The man trailed off, and his footsteps slowed as his head came up, and his solemn gray eyes found Loki. Loki looked right back at him, but said nothing. "Jane," the man said, and Loki detected a faint accent in his deep tones. "Who is this?" Jane got up and faced him, her frame going stiff. "Erik, we detected another anomaly. Another tornado bridge, like Thor used to go back and forth from Asgard. So she gestured to Darcy, went out to look for him, for Thor. Only it wasn't Thor, it was Fenris." Jane glanced back at him. "Loki," Erik cut her off, "the Norse god of mischief." Loki's mouth quirked a little, and he glanced down to hide his amusement. Based on the few occasions the Midgardians had encountered him, he knew why they would come to this conclusion about his character. He was rarely in an equable mood when he visited. "I suppose so." Jane shrugged. and Thor broke the bridge to save the frost giants, which caused a huge explosion and knocked Fenris off the bridge. He fell here and hit his head, so we almost ran over him with the van, Darcy concluded. Jane sent her a bearing look. What? Darcy protested. It's true. Erik turned on Jane. You went after another one of these anomalies without me. Didn't I tell you not to go out into that desert without at least telling me what was going on? I'm sorry, Erik, but this was too important. I knew you were in an important meeting and I couldn't wait, Jane insisted. I had to see if it was Thor, Erik finished, heaving a sigh and shaking his head and frowning. But he stepped toward Loki and put his hands in his pockets, piercing eyes on him. Loki still did not break eye contact, but it was getting harder to conceal the thud of pain in his side. So you're Fenris, Erik said slowly. You're from Asgard too. I am, Loki replied. It's fairly raining Asgardians of late. Erik glanced up before returning his scrutiny to Loki. You fell off the bridge. He lowered his head and darkened his gaze. I did, he answered. Erik's mouth tightened, and he nodded once. He glanced at Jane. Have you taken him to a hospital? It looks like his head is still bleeding. Loki swallowed, restraining himself from reaching up to feel his hair again. Moving either arm would make him double over. We can't take him to a hospital, Darcy reminded Erik. He might have 2 hearts or something. Good point, Erik agreed, his head lowered again in thought. He pulled his hand out of his pocket and glanced at his watch. It is now 3 a.m, Jane. He turned to her. What are you planning on doing with him? Loki frowned. Jane's eyebrows shot up. Doing with him? Well, I'm not going to throw him out if that's what you mean. It's not what I meant, Erik said, watching Loki out of the corner of his eye. I meant, where are you going to put him for the night? And especially if he's injured his head. It's best not to leave him alone. Someone should sit with him. That's not necessary, Loki protested. The undercurrents of Erik's voice were starting to unsettle him. He can sleep here, right on the couch, Jane suggested. He can sleep here, right on the couch, Jane suggested. I have extra pillows in here, and I'll sit with him. I couldn't sleep right now anyway. All right, Erik said slowly. Again, his eyes fell on Loki. Call me if you need anything, Jane. Somehow, Erik could sense Loki's weakness. Somehow, he knew he was more badly injured than he let on. Otherwise, there was no way he would leave Jane alone. I'm going to bed, Darcy sighed, then fished through her bag. Here, Jane. What's that? Jane asked, as she held out her hand to take what Darcy handed her. My taser. Night-night. Loki had no idea what a taser was, but by the cautious way Jane handled it, he guessed it was a weapon. He eyed it and tilted his head away from Jane. What exactly is that? He asked as Darcy shuffled out of the laboratory. A little zappy thing, Jane said, turning and setting it down on the desk. Hurts like crazy. Loki kept staring at it uneasily as Jane crossed into another part of the room and started going through the cupboards. A moment later, though, his gaze flicked Jane's direction. Interesting. She had left the weapon behind. clearly she was braver than she looked, or more foolish. Or Loki's weakness was apparent to more than just Erik. Loki ground his teeth. "Here," Jane said, somewhat out of breath, as she came back around the corner, carrying an armful of white pillows and blue blankets. "I'll put the pillows here at this end, and you can stretch out that way if you want." She laid the pillows down and arranged them, then stood back, the blankets under her arm. She looked at him. "What?" Loki eyed her sideways. "Go ahead," she gestured, indicating the pillows. "You know I will get blood all over the linen," he said. "I would have bandaged your head if you'd have let me," she shot back. Loki blinked, then narrowed his eyes at her. "I don't want to be touched." "Then I suppose you're going to get blood on my linen." Jane's eyes burned now, and Loki sensed she was upset at more than just him. So he bit the inside of his cheek so he would not scream, shifted his weight so he could turn, and then eased down onto his back. His vision flickered and went black for a moment, and he nearly let out a wrenching yell. Instead, he just squeezed his eyes shut and let his breath out in a hiss as his head sank down onto the pillow. "Are you sure you don't want to take off that armor and cape?" Jane asked, her voice a little quieter this time. Realization hit Loki. A realization that made him sick. The little mortal saw his suffering and pitied him. "I am not moving," he growled. "Okay," she murmured. She did not approach him with the blankets, but set them by his feet. Then she settled down at the opposite end of the L-shaped couch and fell into silence, her brow tight, her eyes fixed on him. Loki forced a swallow down his tense throat. "What is it you wish to ask me?" Jane's gaze flickered, and she quickly shook her head. "Nothing." "Either tell me what it is, or stop staring at me," Loki retorted, his arm taut around his middle. Jane's gaze remained steady. Her delicate eyebrows drew together as she leaned hesitantly toward him. "Is Thor all right?" Loki swallowed hard again. A sudden, unexpected dart of different agony shot down from the back of his throat to the pit of his stomach. "Why do you ask?" he said through his teeth, unable to summon much volume. "You said he fought with Loki," she reminded him, her voice unstable. "And the bridge broke. Did he survive?" Loki studied her for a long moment. The way her soft hair framed her pretty face and fell effortlessly across her shoulders. The way every angle of her small frame was still and attentive. The way her bright eyes searched his expression, and her lips parted as she held her breath, waiting for him to answer. Loki casually raised his right eyebrow. "I don't know if he survived," he lied. "I fell off the bridge, remember?" Jane's expression broke, and she turned her head away. Her brow twisted, and tears filled her eyes. Loki stopped looking at her and glared at the ceiling. Neither of them spoke. As the night deepened, Jane eased further back into the couch cushions, the sharp expression of worry on her face dulling, until her long-lashed eyes finally fluttered closed, and she fell asleep.